Hi, my name is Andrew Lawler, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. We had a rough time during Helene, although me and my partner came out pretty well, but it was a great chance for people to come together and help their neighbors, and now I'm happy that you may be helping us as well. So please do donate to the charities that are suggested by North Carolina writers. That said, I was able to do my launch at Malaprops here in Asheville in January, a few months after the storm. My new book is called A Perfect Frenzy: A Royal Governor, His Black Allies, and the Crisis That Spurred the American Revolution. So with that, I'll do a little reading from the start of the book, the prelude, and give you a little flavor for a fresh and different story on the start of the American Revolution, which took place 250 years ago. When I was a child, my grandparents often took me to the scene of the biggest war crime of the American Revolution. Climbing out of their Chevrolet Impala, we strolled into the shaded churchyard of St. Paul's in the heart of our hometown, Virginia's port city of Norfolk. The colonial-era sanctuary, surrounded by tilted tombstones and gnarled water oaks, stood marooned in a bleak urban desert of parking lots, two-story public housing units, and austere high-rise office buildings. We never entered the church. Instead, we walked to one corner of the exterior wall and gazed up. Protruding from the red brick just beneath the eave was a black hemisphere the size of a cantaloupe. A plaque affixed below read, "Fired by Lord Dunmore, January 1st, 1776. Lord Dunmore ruled as King George III's last royal governor of Virginia, the largest, wealthiest, and most populous of the 13 American colonies. By the first day of that fateful year, 1776, my grandparents explained, liberty-loving patriots had driven the wicked Scottish Earl aboard one of the British warships anchored in the harbor of what was the largest city in Virginia and the busiest port between Philadelphia and Charleston. The frustrated nobleman, they said, unleashed a deadly barrage on the defenseless town. One cannonball smashed through a home, shattering the leg of a nursing mother. I was told that the subsequent raging fires reduced the church to 4 charred walls and the entire port to ashes. A single dovecote was the only structure left standing. Thousands were rendered homeless and destitute at the start of a bitter winter. No other city in North America, before or since, has suffered such a complete calamity. Today, inured to 20th century horrors like Coventry, Dresden, and Hiroshima, we tend to forget that even in the most vicious 18th century European conflicts, settlements were sacked but never purposefully leveled. The ball in the wall spoke more powerfully than any history book of the terrible price of freedom. Dunmore was, to my young mind, an entitled and thuggish terrorist who vainly tried to stem the flooding tide of independence. I was in good company. George Washington called him that arch traitor to the rights of humanity. Richard Henry Lee, the Virginia delegate to the Continental Congress, who introduced the resolution to separate from the mother country, said that if the king's ministers had searched through the world for a person best fitted to ruin their cause and procure union and success for these colonies, they would not have found a more complete agent than Lord Dunmore. On the floor of Congress, Lee derided the governor as a drunk, while other Americans labeled him a pirate, a monster, and a rapist. He was said to deflower young white virgins and entertain black women at orgies. One prominent planner suggested that he should be placed securely chained in some madhouse. Virginia patriot Judith Bell declared, "There was never a viler wretch than the Earl of Dunmore," adding, "It appears that he takes pleasure in killing his fellow man." The royal governor was, noted one historian, the first full-fledged villain to step from the wings as the Revolutionary War unfolded. His infamy contrasted sharply with the saintly glow around my childhood hero, invariably referred to as Mr. Jefferson, as if he might at any moment knock on our front door and ask me to recite the Declaration of Independence. The two men were the fixed poles in my American identity as a youth, the humble humanitarian who bravely asserted that all were created equal, and the arrogant aristocrat intent on maintaining brute authority. Jefferson's aura faded over the years as I became aware that his defiant ownership of people and his sexual relationship with the enslaved Sally Hemings were at painful odds with his soaring rhetoric. Dunmore, however, never lost his dirty taint. There was, after all, that ball in the wall. Decades later, a magazine editor asked me to come up with an idea to mark Black History Month. At the time, I had returned to Virginia to visit my mother, and we made the familiar hour-long drive to colonial Williamsburg. The old capital was restored with money from the Rockefeller family to resemble the town in Dunmore's day, and charming brick and clapboard homes line the tidy streets, as they did on the eve of the Revolution. There is even a careful reproduction of the elegant mansion where the governor lived for 4 years. During the tour of what was dubbed the palace, our lace-cape guide pointed out the Earl's stately grandfather clock, which, unlike his reputation, had survived the ravages of time. Leafing later through the books at a nearby gift shop, I stumbled on a startling mention of Lord Dunmore's Ethiopian Regiment, a corps of armed black men who fought for the British against their patriot owners. In that era, 4 out of 10 Virginians were enslaved workers. The governor himself owned more individuals than all but a handful of white planters. As the Revolution gathered steam in the summer of 1775, he fled the palace for Royal Navy ships anchored off Norfolk. He needed troops to make a stand against the rebels, while those in lifetime servitude yearned for liberty. Defying threats of torture, imprisonment, and death, enslaved people flocked to his side. More than 30 years before Abraham Lincoln was born, Lord Dunmore formally emancipated any enslaved people owned by patriots who would fight for the king, gave them weapons, and sent them into battle against those who held them in bondage. After writing a brief article on this bit of history neglected by my grandparents and school texts, I sensed that there was more to the story. My journalistic instincts whetted, I set out to uncover what else had been omitted or obfuscated. I traced Dunmore's steps, drinking tea in his Scottish garden pavilion topped with a massive stone pineapple, crossing the ocean on a ship that followed his route to the New World, and visiting ballrooms and battlefields where the rebellion had unfolded. I interviewed 8th-generation descendants of enslaved Virginians who had found freedom on the rocky coast of eastern Canada, spoke with archaeologists, and sought out reenactors of the Revolutionary era who could explain the finer points of a skirmish. I pestered professional historians for clues and clarifications amid a blizzard of letters, reports, newspaper articles, and scholarly papers, all the while struggling to read 18th century scrawl. Again and again, I returned to Norfolk, puzzling over a long-lost colonial city that had been the scene of a series of dramatic events, but contained almost no physical trace of those events beyond the churchyard perimeter. Much of what I uncovered contradicted what I had been taught. The most stunning revelation was that Dunmore did not destroy Norfolk. That brutal act was, I learned, encouraged by Thomas Jefferson, perpetrated by the colony's patriot authorities, and then blamed on the royal governor. The church had survived the cannonade only to be torched, along with any other building still intact, by patriot troops on the orders of the rebellion's leadership. Not even outhouses were spared. A patriot investigation later documented this intentional act in detail, but the report was kept secret for 60 years, and Dunmore remains the prime culprit in the public imagination. Even the irrefutable evidence of the ball in the wall proved ambiguous. The chunk of iron had fallen to the ground in the aftermath of destruction. Nearly a century passed before an enslaved worker dug it out of the ground and cemented it back in place at his owner's direction. So I hope that gave you a little taste of my new book. And again, thank you for supporting Asheville and the charities, people who are trying to rebuild this shattered town. It still is quite tough here. If you drive around the River Arts District, it really does look like a war took place. So thanks for supporting us, and I wish you all the best. Bye.